Pikmin 4 brings an onslaught of big baddies for the player to fight. Some new, some old, all with their own unique spin that diversifies the gameplay. I'm Kyle with 1UP Binge, and these are Pikmin 4 bosses, weak to powerful. One thing to note before we begin is that many of these bosses have multiple appearances, and a few of them have smaller or weaker versions. So we're going to be basing these rankings on the most powerful forms of the enemy throughout the game. As usual, we'll be starting with our weakest boss and working our way up to the most powerful. Cooling down our first entry is the Blizzarding Blowhog, a larger variation of the Snowy Blowhog that essentially acts the same way. The Blizzarding Blowhog hardly even qualifies as a boss due to its low stats and not very strong offense. Essentially, it has one attack, that being blowing ice at the Pikmin, which frees them in place. With that said, the player is given ample time to unfreeze the Pikmin, which makes this attack not too effective. The Blizzarding Blowhog's defensive strategy is actually more potentially deadly, as it will launch the Pikmin in front of it after its regular attack. This is only an issue in certain situations though, such as when a player is in a cave with a bottomless pit. Sticking to the same family, though polar opposites in temperature. Next we have the Titan Blowhog. This boss is essentially the same as the Blizzarding Blowhog in terms of its health, size, and attack pattern. The only real difference is that the Titan Blowhog blows out fire instead of ice, which, as you may have guessed based on its higher ranking, proves to be a more effective attack, while the Pikmin simply freeze in place when in contact with ice. Fire causes them to run around in panic, thus making them harder to retrieve. Red Pikmin are naturally resistant to fire, but the Titan Blowhog can still burn the petals off their head regardless. So no Pikmin is totally immune to these beasts. Next we have the Bug-Eyed Crawmad. Returning from Pikmin 3, the Bug-Eyed Crawmad is a large crustacean creature which hides away in its holes waiting for the player to come around. Once it spots its target, it lunges from the ground and can snatch up to 10 Pikmin in its mouth. That sounds like a lot, but the Bug-Eyed Crawman is pretty easy to avoid, especially if the Pikmin are attached to Oatchi. Not only that, this boss has some of the lowest health of any boss in the game. Granted, you have to attack its eyes to flip it on its back first, but even that isn't that much of a hassle, given that the eyes have pretty low health too. Moving on to another bug-eyed creature, the Jumbo Bulboard is up next. It's undeniable that Bulboard enemies are amongst the most recognizable enemies in the Pikmin games, making frequent appearances ever since the first entry. These creatures have many variations, and with Pikmin 4, we were introduced to a new member of the family with the Jumbo Bulboard. This boss is quite similar to the regular Bulboard, except it's bigger and a little more aggressive. Unlike the regular or dwarf Bulboard, the Jumbo one is never seen asleep. Instead, it prefers to patrol around looking for prey, even occasionally hiding in vegetation waiting to ambush the player. The formidable size of the Bulboard does make it a bit tougher than some other enemies. As long as you don't underestimate it though, it can be taken care of without too much trouble. As noteworthy as the Bulboard enemies are, arguably the most iconic boss in the series is the Burrowing Snagret, appearing in every single mainline Pikmin game as well as a trophy in the Smash Bros. Series. The Burrowing Snagret is a bird-snake hybrid that emerges from the ground to pick at enemies. In Pikmin 4, Oatchi can charge at the enemy, which can stun it for long enough to where it will burrow back into the ground before attacking. However, if Oatchi misses the opportunity, then the Burrowing Snagret can swallow the Pikmin pretty easily. Much like its other incarnations from previous installments, the Burrowing Snagret does keep players on their toes, even if Oatchi's powers do make it a little easier than some of its appearances in previous games. Poking into the next spot is the Porquillin. The first boss encountered during the game's tutorial. The Porquillin is a round enemy that shoots out spikes at the player from 4 quadrants on its body. The spikes can stun or kill the Pikmin, but once all the spikes are absent from its body, the Porquillin has no offensive or defensive measures, leaving it open to being pummeled by Pikmin. It's really slow and its attack isn't that effective or hard to avoid. The only reason it ranks this high is due to its somewhat high health, but even so, it's not all that powerful of a creature. Belly flopping in next is Master Hop. Much like the Jumbo Bulborb, Master Hop is a much bigger version of a smaller enemy, this time being the yellow Wally Hop. As such, the Master Hop essentially acts exactly the same as its smaller counterpart, jumping up high into the air and falling on the player and their Pikmin. Rock Pikmin are thankfully immune to being crushed, making them a good choice to go up against these massive amphibians. But even that isn't a foolproof plan, as if the Master Hop is on a certain surface, its massive hops can sink the ground into the water, making for another hazard for the Pikmin to avoid. Up next, we have the OG final boss of the Pikmin franchise, Emperor Bulbax. This creature has somewhat of a complicated history because even though it was arguably the most powerful enemy in the original Pikmin, Emperor Bulbax was weakened significantly for its return in Pikmin 2. The large grub dog returned once again for the most recent installment, where it's much closer to its interpretation in the second game. In Pikmin 4, Emperor Bulbax has 3 attacks: eating the Pikmin, crushing the Pikmin, and screaming to make the Pikmin run around in panic. They can still be stunned if they eat bomb rocks, but on top of that, they can also be stunned by Oatchi or frozen with ice Pikmin. Sticking to the theme of enemies that crush Pikmin, the Water Wraith rolls in next. Fans of Pikmin 2 will recognize this large liquid monstrosity who returns again to haunt players as they traverse down the engulfed castle cave. On the first 4 sublevels of the cave, the Water Wraith will drop down from the ceiling after some time passes and attempt to roll over the Pikmin, resulting in an instant kill if successful. Attaching the Pikmin to Oatchi can make this easier to avoid when it was in Pikmin 2, but regardless, the invulnerability of the Water Wraith still makes for a challenge if the player hasn't collected all the treasures on the sublevel. Once the final sublevel is reached, the player can collect purple Pikmin, which can turn the Water Wraith from a liquid into a solid for reasons I have yet to fully understand. After breaking it down for a while, the Water Wraith will lose its rollers and run around in peril, no longer being harmful to the Pikmin. Repeat the same process with the purple Pikmin again, and the Water Wraith will be no more. Another enemy that's fond of crushing is the Baldy Longlegs. Returning from Pikmin 3, although sporting a new tropical look in this game, Baldy Longlegs is a member of the large Arachnorb family that have terrorized the Pikmin many a time. They act similarly to any other member of their family, stomping around with the only weak point on their body being their round core, which is a bit out of reach for most Pikmin, with the exception of yellow and winged Pikmin. The only way to attack the Baldy Longlegs is by having the Pikmin climb up their legs to reach the core, although they can be shaken off either by the Baldy Longlegs shaking its body, or the leg that they're slamming onto the ground. Like many bosses, this is another one that is made easier with Oatchi, as the Pikmin attaching themselves to him makes it much harder for them to get crushed. If you make sure to gather your Pikmin up quickly after getting shaken off, your army will mostly be safe from the Baldy Longlegs. Moving into colder territory, the Arctic Cannon Beetle is up next. A Sub-Zero variation of the armored cannon beetle from the first Pikmin. The Arctic Cannon Beetle attempts to suck the Pikmin into its mouth. After a few seconds, it inhales much more intensely, revealing its weak spot on its back. During its extended inhale session, the player must travel around to its back and throw the Pikmin on it, which is made much easier if Oatchi stuns the enemy. If it's not done quickly enough, the Arctic Cannon Beetle will shoot a snowball out of its mouth, which can hit a wall and cause icicles to drop on the player. But let's talk about the Arctic Cannon Beetle's cousin, the Horned Cannon Beetle, which is even more powerful. This creature acts somewhat similarly to its Arctic counterpart, inhaling before shooting out a boulder at the player. The difference this time around is that the Horned Cannon Beetle inhales through its blowhole instead of its mouth. So if a Pikmin is thrown into said hole, it'll cause the boss to open up its shell and become vulnerable. The Horned Cannon Beetle has more health and shoots out a larger boulder that can actually crush Pikmin, which is why we're ranking it higher than its cousin. Onto another shelled boss, we have the Crusted Rumpup. This is a harder boss to rank as the level of difficulty when it comes to the fight depends on how well equipped you are at that point in the game. The Crusted Rumpup is a large scorpion-looking enemy that charges at anything that comes into its line of sight. It can eat up to 5 Pikmin at once and stun the player or Oatchi at the same time. The only way to defeat it is by attaching enough Pikmin to its tail to flip it on its back, exposing its belly. If you have purple Pikmin in your party, this is a much easier task, as it will only take 2 of them to flip it over instead of 15. Also, if you have the rush boots to avoid the charges of the creature, this fight becomes a lot easier. Next we have the Man-at Legs. Reprising its role from Pikmin 2, the Man-at Legs is a robotic variation of the Bizarre Spiders, which shoots at the Pikmin on sight. As usual, the player has to wait for the Man-at Legs to reload in order to get an opening for an attack. The Man-at Legs in Pikmin 4 has significantly more health than its Pikmin 2 counterpart, and most of the objects to hide from the incoming fire in this newer entry are destructible. Even so, the fight in this game proves to be easier for one simple reason. Yes, we're of course talking about Oatchi, who can protect the Pikmin so long as they remain attached to him. Oatchi is kind of OP if you haven't noticed. Now we get to our only double ranking on the list, those being the Puffstool and the Toxstool. The Puffstool is an enemy who has been absent from the series ever since the first game, but it came back and brought its cousin along for this newest entry. These are 2 large mushrooms with legs who will run away from the Pikmin instead of attacking them. If pursued, then the creatures will let out a toxic gas which will confuse the Pikmin in the Puffstool's case, or poison them in the Toxstool's case. It's true that poison is deadly deadly to the Pikmin while Confusion is not, but the protagonist can get rid of poison with a simple whistle, while the Pikmin remain confused until the Puffstool is defeated. For that reason, we think they kind of level each other out. Not to mention white Pikmin are pretty much invulnerable to the Toxtool entirely. Rolling in next is Emperor Bulbax's better half, Empress Bulbax. Making her return from Pikmin 2, Empress Bulbax is a massive creature whose main form of attack is rolling back and forth, crushing anything in her vicinity, including her own children. That's another thing. Later versions of this boss feature her popping out Bulborb larvae, which also attack the Pikmin. Empress Bulbax shouldn't give you too much issue in the first two fights, as long as you stay in front and call the Pikmin back before she starts rolling. However, the third time you face her, Empress Bulbax is located in a very narrow hallway, making that previous strategy impossible. This fight is one of the hardest in the game and requires either very careful planning or a lot of items used quickly. Even at her weakest, Empress Bulbax is one of the toughest enemies in the game, if not the series. But let's talk about the Gildamander. It's a large lizard-like creature that carries plates of fake gold on its back. It will try to eat the Pikmin until the gold is knocked off its back, causing it to prioritize putting it back on. As the gold falls from its back, it starts to expose its weak points, which the Pikmin can attack. The part that really makes this tricky is that the Pikmin will attack the fallen gold on the ground instinctively, giving the Gildamander an opportunity to swallow them up while it throws the gold back on its back. Even without the gold, the Gildamander has very high defense, making for one of the tougher enemies from a defense standpoint. Now we get to the largest, toughest, and coolest Arachnorb in the game, the Groovy Longlegs. Much like the Man-at-Legs, the Groovy Longlegs seems to be part robot, specifically in its core, which has been replaced with a disco ball. Like almost every other Arachnorb, the Groovy Longlegs stomps around and crushes every Pikmin underneath its feet. The one difference this time around is that the Groovy Longlegs will also spew out a mind-controlling gas, which causes all the Pikmin beneath it to dance uncontrollably. As the battle continues, the Groovy Longlegs will change up the music to a much faster paced beat, causing it to dance even faster. This is another case where you'll want to keep your Pikmin attached to Oatchi as much as possible, if they're not attacking the creature itself. The Groovy Longlegs has the second largest single health wheel out of any boss in the game, beaten only by the Fulix, an orange cousin of the Gulix from the first Pikmin. The Fulix ranks this high almost solely on its high health alone. However, unlike the Gulix, the Fulix is not vulnerable to blue Pikmin and has an offensive strategy of stretching around to absorb any Pikmin type it can. The only way to stun the Fulix is by having 15 Pikmin, or 2 if you have purple Pikmin, pull on its tail, which will cause the creature to explode into pieces and expose its core. This does give the player time to attack the core, but they have to be quick as the Fulix will reconstruct itself and absorb anything in its path. We bet no one is surprised to find out that the Smoky Prog is taking home a medal, this time around the bronze. We're sure fans of Pikmin 1 got some PTSD when this scary thing reared its head again in this new game. Here, the Smoky Prog appears in nighttime levels where it hatches from an egg and slowly works its way towards the Lumignol. Much like the first game, it's surrounded by a deadly fog that will kill Pikmin upon impact. On top of that, it has a few new attacks such as spitting a glowing red projectile that will create waves that will kill the Pikmin that it hits. Ideally, you'll have Oatchi with you to jump over said waves, but even then, the Smoky Prog will occasionally release a loud roar that will cause the dog and all the Pikmin to run away in panic. There is a chance to destroy the Smoky Prog's egg before it hatches, but it's quite slim and risky to do so any way you look at it. One of the more confusing enemies to talk about is the Sovereign Bulblax, which takes home the Silver Medal of Power. Earlier, we talked about how the Emperor Bulblax had been weakened significantly since its introduction in Pikmin 1. It turns out that the original, much more powerful Emperor Bulblax is still around, but changed its name to the Sovereign Bulblax. Pretty much everything about the smaller Emperor Bulblax's moveset applies to the Sovereign Bulblax, but the size and added health of this beast makes it much harder to avoid its attacks. It's also much more agile than its smaller counterpart, jumping high into the air and slamming down onto its opponents. We'd recommend using purple and red Pikmin, along with Oatchi and a bunch of items, to take this giant beast down as fast as possible. As powerful as the Sovereign Bulblax is, we still think the Gold Medal of Power easily has to go to the Ancient Sirehound, the final boss of the game and as such the most complicated and deadly. The Ancient Sirehound is a mostly peaceful creature that suddenly goes into a rage upon seeing Louis. I mean, we don't really blame him as Louis sends us into a rage too, but regardless, the Ancient Sirehound is not the type of enemy you want to tick off. The fight against it happens in 5 different phases, each of which sees the canine using a different elemental power to its advantage. The Ancient Sirehound will chomp at the Pikmin, charge at the player, send different hazardous balls bouncing around the stage, fly, and even spit out similar venom as the Smoky Prog. They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but apparently this dog has more than enough tricks up its sleeve to begin with. With its wide variety of attacks, multiple wheels of health, large size, and unpredictable nature, the Ancient Sirehound undoubtedly stands as the most powerful enemy in the game, if not the series.